I had breakfast with in the junior officers' mess, and those are no longer existent, but junior officers' mess with one other officer who was killed that day, and I was served by a steward's mate named Dory Miller, and he was a heavyweight champion in his time, and he served me breakfast that day and was recently honored with a United States Postal Service stamp. I finished breakfast and I was on my way to my room to change my clothes to go ashore to play golf that day. And as I was going back to my room, a Marine sergeant ran down a hatch yelling that the Japanese are bombing us. I knew him well. It was Sergeant Willoughby, because it saved my life that he did this. He was just an outstanding person to have on watch with you, and I had him a few times, and I really felt that he was always well informed and accurate and just a good man. And I believed him when he said this, so I kept on going, and to get to my battle station, which was in the plotting room, which is in the bottom of the ship, I had to go through the part of the ship where the most damage was done and where most of our men were killed. And if I hadn't listened to him and proceeded directly there, I could have, highly likely that I would be caught in that bunch of people, because it was just, would have been difficult to go any further because of the way the damage came when we got hit by torpedoes. So I got to my battle station, which was the plotting room, and when I got there, there were about 16 of us and one other officer. The rest of the group, the large number of them, just didn't get there. It was impossible to get through the ship to get to this space. And we stayed, my men and I stayed in that space until it became obvious that the watertight doors were giving way slightly, and we were beginning to collect oil and some little water, but for some reason mainly oil. And I decided that we'd better move. So we moved forward into Central Station, which was a similar highly protected compartment in the bottom of the ship, where the damage control officer prevailed and ran all the damage control effort that could be done. Well, it was I think only two other of his people got to the Central Station, and not much could be accomplished because there was no communications. All phones were wireless in those days, or were wired phones, like telephones, and these were all broken. Back in the plotting room, we couldn't even turn on power for the secondary battery of guns. They were the 5-inch guns for surface warfare, which the battleships were designed for. And then we were supposed to provide their power and make them usable. Nothing worked. Everything had been cut, and it was just, we had light because there were emergency lights available that were battery powered. We had that. But we got in as I say, we got into the Central Station, and when we did, we closed the watertight doors, and later on during the time we were there, we could hear people outside those doors who were lost, but it was decided that no sense in opening them because it would just wipe out us too. And so we were not being damage control type people. I decided and got permission to leave, and I sent the men up a wiring trunk, which on that ship ran from the central station up to the conning tower where the captain's battle station was. Got all my men up there, and when I arrived up there and took a look around at Pearl Harbor, I began to think that I was better off where I had come from. It was such a mess. And the first thing that I saw was our captain, and he had just been, his front had been cut in half by a fragment that came from a bomb on the ship alongside the battleship Tennessee. One of their guns, I think it was, got hit by a bomb. The bomb exploded, and a fragment came over and ripped the captain open completely. And he was pretty much gone, but he was still trying hard. And we tried to give him morphine, but that wasn't possible because we were at peace. And when I went to the first aid stations, the little boxes that were around the ship, since we were at peace and morphine being what it was, we weren't allowed to put morphine in these. Right after Pearl Harbor, morphine went in those cases. So he had to suffer, but he was still concerned about his ship and his crew, and asked about them and wanted to be informed of what was going on, because he was propped up on the bridge and just, it was pathetic. He was a wonderful captain, and he richly deserved the Medal of Honor that he received after he died. And he did die very soon after I got up there. In the meantime, Lieutenant Ricketts, who saved all of us, arrived on the bridge and took charge of moving his body. But Lieutenant Ricketts was, he really accomplished something that was important. The Oklahoma got hit by a few torpedoes and rolled over. We got hit by 8 torpedoes, and we did not roll over because Lieutenant Ricketts and a boatswain mate who helped him ran the length of the ship underwater in a passageway that around the lower decks, and opened all of the counter flooding valves, which let water into the empty tanks on the starboard side of the ship, and that provided a wading over so that we had already tilted to 27 degrees. And then when the water got in the tanks, it brought us down to being level, and then we went straight down to the bottom rather than roll over like the Oklahoma did. But up on the bridge, I was up there. There was nowhere for me to go to get off of it until, well, as a matter of fact, I think the Arizona blew up while I was there. And finally, the smoke became so heavy that I had to leave the bridge. And the only way I could get off by that time was to go forward and, I forgot, before that, quite unexpectedly, the steward's mate, Miller, showed up. And I still don't know where he came from, but he got there. And Lieutenant Junior Grade White arrived up on the bridge, and he had a man with him. And here, even as an ensign, I'd learned something I assigned them to 2 machine guns. I didn't know what they'd do with them, but they were assigned to 2 machine guns, which were on the forward part, just forward of the bridge, just forward of the conning tower. And so they shot them for a while. They didn't last very long because they were water cooled, and there was no water up there. So they fired a few bullets, and I'm not sure that they terrified anybody, but they tried hard. And then they departed. They went down to help with the work and the firefighting. And I then proceeded to leave the bridge, and I jumped down from the bridge to turret 2 and crawled. I couldn't see anything because of the smoke, and crawled along the top of turret 2 and slid down the face of it and jumped over to the top of turret 1. I finally got down to the forecastle deck, and here were 2 other ensigns, and we were completely out of touch and isolated from the rest of the ship by a combination of smoke and fire and lack of communication, no way to talk to anybody else. So we made what was then a major decision for 3 ensigns to make, to abandon ship. So we abandoned ship and swam toward Ford Island, which was actually about 50 yards away from us, but we had to swim a lot more than 50 yards because of the oil on the surface of the water that you wanted to avoid, and some pieces of oil that were on fire. And as I was swimming ashore, I heard a voice behind me yelling out, "Help, save me, I can't swim, I can't swim." And I recognized, I was 22 years old, I was 21 years old, and I recognized the voice of an old chief petty officer, probably 40 years old. Shows you the difference in ages then. And this old chief, who'd been on the ship, I think, forever, I could hear him yelling, I can almost hear him today, "Help, save me, I can't swim, I can't swim." Well, I was just too tired to give him any physical support, so I stopped swimming and turned to give him some encouragement. And as I got my head around, here he went sailing past me, still screaming, "Help, save me, I can't swim, I can't swim." And he got to Ford Island at least 10 minutes before I did. Oh, he really did do. Well, I got to Ford Island. I somehow, at some point in there, I was taken into the bomb-proof area where the residents, the male and female, where the children and wives of residents on Ford Island had been put, and somebody told me to stand up and tell them that things were okay. Well, I don't know what I told them, but must have told them something. But it must have looked odd for them to see me in a pair of skivvy shorts and 2 big tea leaves that I had for shoes, because I'd lost my shoes when I started swimming. That was over. I remember I had a ham sandwich, and then I went back to the ship. I got back to the ship to help in the firefighting, and spent some time at that until something hit me in the head, and it didn't knock me out, but it became obvious that it ended my usefulness as far as others were concerned, and I was put in a boat and sent over to the hospital to spend the night, which I did.